And welcome back, students. We are now at our final Photoshop exercise. Today we're going to be focusing on creating shapes and other things with inside Photoshop. Because up to this point we've mostly been using Photoshop not so much for image creation, but mostly for image editing and touch-up and stuff like that. Now let's go ahead and focus a little bit more on the creation side of what Photoshop can do. In order to do that, we need to first create a new Photoshop document. And when I go ahead and click on File New, we should have our menu pop up. What it looks like will kind of vary based upon if you're using 2015, 2017, etc. But the process is still the same. For our purposes, we're going to go ahead and choose a web type image, and we're going to leave it on the common. What you do want to change though, and I repeat, you do want to change this, is the background contents. All right, no matter which one you're on, you want to change the background contents from white, and you got to scroll down to transparent. If you do not do that, what that does, let's say you make this beautiful image, and let's say you go to paste it in against a color background, you're going to have this white box around your image. Transparency is only good though for certain image types such as PNG. It's not supported in JPEG. It's not supported in bitmap. GIF and PNG will support them. A couple other ones will support them. So it's very imperative that when we save this, we make sure we save it as a PNG file. Let's go ahead and title this as Photoshop exercise number 7. Okay, and we're going to leave everything else just as the defaults for now. And we're going to go ahead and click on Create. So here is our artboard with our Photoshop file ready to go. All right. So in our document here, we're going to come down here to the rectangle tool. And when I click and hold on it, you'll see some shape things that are kind of familiar if you remember from Illustrator. Like you have rectangle tool, rounded rectangles, ellipses, polygons, lines. For our purposes, let's go ahead and start with just a regular rectangle tool. And what I want to stop and point out real quick are these items right up here at the top. You can see that we have the option for fill and stroke, and also a stroke width. So these are dimensions. If I just draw a regular rectangle right now, it just draws this box and fills it in with this black fill color. And it also brings up this properties menu, which of course I can do other things with. And you notice down here are other pieces that are familiar to us from within side of things like Illustrator. So like for example, I draw a shape on top of shape, it'll add those two shapes. And you'll notice in the artboard, it adds those two rectangles. I can also go ahead and then if I want to change one of these shapes, if I just click on it, you can see that I've lost that ability to edit it up there. However, if I go back to the rectangle tool, you can see if I click on one of these rectangles, I now have those options back. So what I want to do, let's go ahead and change this first rectangle. I'm just going to double click or single click on the fill here. And I can actually choose a color to make that rectangle. You can see that I also have gradient options that I can do as well. And I also have pattern options. Let's go ahead and for this first one, let's just choose a solid color. And I'm just going to go ahead and make it blue. And I'm going to change the stroke. If you notice, I don't have a stroke right now. It's got the white with the line through, which means there's none. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a red stroke. Right. I'm also going to go ahead and increase the stroke width, so that way it's a little bit more visible. And 12.112 pixels sounds good. Next, let's click on rectangle 2. And let's go ahead and with that one, let's go ahead and apply a gradient to it. Right? And you can go ahead and pick a gradient. I'm going to pick this one right here. And you can see there are these familiar arrows that we have that we had back in Illustrator. So here we also have the option to control our gradient here. And of course, these are not just arrows, but they're also sliders. So I can manipulate and move these values around if I want in order to change how this rectangle is presented inside of the gradient. I'm also going to change the stroke here as well. Let's do a gradient stroke because you don't have to have just a solid color stroke. You can actually do a gradient stroke. So I'm going to choose this yellow and blue here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that as the default. And I'm going to bump up the stroke value on that to about 15.97. Next, let's go ahead and go and change over to the rounded rectangle tool. And I'm going to add a rounded rectangle right here. Sounds good. Here's my rounded rectangle. You see it's using the last known configuration values that I had from when I drew. So I want to change those now to a pattern, and I'm going to choose pattern here. Let's do the waves here, and I'm going to go over to my stroke and do the same thing. I'm going to use a pattern, and I'm going to leave that right there. See, when I click it, automatically changes over to the pattern that I want. That one looks pretty good, so I'm just going to leave that as is. Next, let's go ahead and just use a ellipse tool, and I'm going to draw an ellipse. Now remember, ellipses are not just circles. They can also be ovular in shape. And you can see it quickly draws an ellipse tool in there for me. Alright, a couple of things here, and then I'm going to let you guys kind of play around with this and kind of make your own shapes. So I want to show the custom shape tool. And when I get the custom shape tool, right up here you'll see this little box up here that says shapes. And you'll notice some of these seem kind of familiar, and that's because they should. We've seen some of the stuff in Illustrator before, like for example, this release. There's also a cog here that opens up other things that we might be familiar with that we've seen before. For example, if I switch over to film, it's going to ask me if I want to replace them or if I want to append it. Append means it's going to add to it. For now, I'm just going to click cancel. But you can easily go through here and modify your shapes. I'm just going to grab the light bulb for now. And when I click on it, all I want to do to draw it in here is I just click and drag, just like normal. Now I have a light bulb in here. Now if I want to come through and add any of these elements, you can see I still have a fill stroke selected. So if I want to change the stroke to, let's say, a solid color and make that yellow, I now have a yellow border around that light bulb. You can see that this shape in particular does not really have a fill color because it's mostly just a outline here. However, I could, of course, go through and choose a different shape that might demonstrate this purpose better. So I'm going to go to, let's say let's use the release, and we'll just draw that. And you can see now it is the yellow stroke and fill. I'm going to change the stroke to blue just so you can see that a little bit better in effect. And then maybe I'll decrease the stroke on that just a little bit. You can see I can also click and create custom shape and can choose what I want it to make. So you have multiple options here of how to come in and make different shapes within inside Illustrator. Last thing I want to show is I'm just going to go back to this rectangle 2 here, and I'm going to go back to the shape properties. And if I want to modify this shape here, just get back to rectangle. If I want to modify the shape, you can see up here is where we modified it before. We can also set width and height in here. There's a lot of dimensions in there. We can go ahead and do any of these other options that we have available to us. So what I want you to do for this final exercise is just kind of have some fun. Go through and play with the shape tools, add some different effects, gradients, make yourself an image. This is much more like for those of you that have worked with, like, for example, Microsoft Paint. This might be a little bit more in what your interest is and how Photoshop can create those kind of images. So that's all for now, folks. Until next time.